as a whole species. We all have these diverse abilities, let's say, for want of a better word, or interests even. We have, what are they, 4 astronauts circling the moon this week?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't be one of them. I'll tell you that. I'd want my feet on the ground, but I'm delighted. I don't want my mind on the ground, but I want my feet on the ground. And I'm so delighted that they would put their whole focus and life into the future of exploration as we know it in our times. So for me, it's to share this, to say it's okay for some people to have these experiences and not others. It's okay for some people to have the gift of tongues and not Aunt Grace. That was my one and only experience. Why? The synchronicity of it had deeper meaning. And so we as amateurs can look to those people who have taken the time and put in the effort to understand and go deeper into meanings, to enrich our own lives. And you know the funny thing that happens, Bernie? It's that when we're open to this, even a little, it starts to happen to us. Not that it's just starting, but we're beginning to recognize perhaps things that were always there. Just opening up to wonder and mystery of this whole experience of life.
Get ready to be outraged, ladies and gentlemen. Get ready to be outraged. We're interviewing today Judith Crichton, who has a remarkable book. Yes, Outrageous Synchronicity. And she's had a zillion of them, and she records some of them in this wonderful book. So if you want to hear a lot of good synchronicity stories and something about how they operate, this book is for you. And we'll introduce Judith, and then we'll get into some of her amazing stories. She's a native of Canada, Toronto of all places, attended college in Switzerland, then Queen's University and the University of Toronto, where she got her MA. And eventually, Université de Sherbrooke, as a Canada acquired required official bilingual status. She established a corporate translation company in Toronto, Montreal, and Quebec City. Later, she served as executive of the Girl Guides of Canada, joining the Potential of America Canada as director, then vice president for marketing and communications. She's an active person who's done a lot out there in the regular world, but she's led a crypto life that she didn't let people know, a dual life in which she was experiencing many different anomalous events. And her book begins with one that she will now tell us about. So welcome to Connecting with Coincidence, Judith.
Hi, Bernie. Gee, it's great to be here and so much fun to talk about these extraordinary experiences that most people have to some degree, but not everybody has them to the degree of others. So when we share our experiences, we're allowing people to pop in to another side of human experience that perhaps they don't necessarily get to experience themselves. I like to think of it as looking at human talent or human ability in so many different guises, and this is just one little aspect. So if you can picture this book of mine opening with a not so long ago story. Just my husband and I were out hiking together, and there was nobody on this beautiful path on a beautiful, beautiful summer day. And a rabbit maybe, or a bird in the tree. And all of a sudden, we're just talking about our lives together. We are older people who haven't been married very long. So we always had lots of wonderful things to share about our lives with each other. All of a sudden, my husband sneezed, just like that, just sneezed. And he reached for a handkerchief. And out of the blue, he said, "Did your dad have cloth handkerchiefs, linen handkerchiefs? Do you remember that?" I said, "Sure. My dad always had a cloth handkerchief, usually with his initial embroidered on the corner, and he'd stick it in his vest pocket." But gee, I hadn't talked about cloth hankies for the longest time. As a matter of fact, my husband said, "I think I still have a few of my dad's." And I said, "I do too." And both of us talked about the memory of these men we loved so much, both his father and my father, men I didn't know his dad and he didn't know mine. And so we were reminiscing, but we had these wonderful feelings of love and being cared for by responsible men who were devoted to their families and us to each other. And so we carried on our walk and came to a road that divided the trail. My husband took my hand and we jogged across because there was a little traffic, not much. And lying on the other side of the trail, lying right there in full view, was the most beautiful folded white linen hanky, a little handkerchief, the likes of which I had not seen in decades and decades, nor my husband. We stood stunned, looked at each other, looked at the handkerchief, looked around to see where it might have come from. Absolutely nobody, nowhere, anywhere. He picked it up and laughed and put it in his pocket and would take it home as a treasure. But for my husband, this was a wonderful, happy coincidence, remarkable, a story you would tell at dinner that night. But not for me. It was way, way more than that for me. Because in that handkerchief, in that moment, in that extraordinary coincidence, was meaning, deep meaning that connected to all the other coincidences and serendipitous events, some of which had been utterly life-changing. Not all, some frivolous like this one that just bring two people close together. So I open my book with that because it then allows me to go into current theories and right into the science and into corners of anthropologists like Eric Wargo and academics and researchers like Jeffrey Kripal, who is renowned in this whole area for his dedication and teaching as vice dean of a major university in the States. So that's my beginning story, Bernie.
That's the beginning story, and without going through the details now, but the key thing for you was that it links with other stories in the book. It's a linking, and it's a link that we could say maybe your father helped make happen. And I simply want to do what was for your might have been for your husband, as opposed to you. And so it's so important what you're saying, Judith, is that two people can experience the same coincidence and have quite different reactions to it, quite different meanings attributed to it. And what that hanky gave you was an intro for your book, among other things, because it linked to so much of what you were writing about. And for me, What I get is that for your husband is that you and he were out being happy together. You were open. It seemed like there was a forest somewhere around there, um, and that opens up minds. So I believe we have the ability, as Eric Wargo might suggest, to see the future. And my view of that was that we also have the ability to scan our environment to see what's out there without knowing in the usual five senses what we're going to encounter. So the key thing for me listening is he suddenly brought it up, which means he kind of knew it was going to show up, that handkerchief. And that's the simplest version of my ability to understand. Well, we're now going to go into more of your stories. And one of the questions that I have for you is, this wasn't the first time in your life that a meaningful coincidence, a synchronicity, took place. So why don't you tell us how you got started, especially since so many of them have to do with life and death?
Well, that's great. I'll just flag one more thing about the handkerchief, and that it was white, and that when you are a literary person, as you'll find out from my training and my interest, the symbolism in that handkerchief, which for my husband, if as a former naval officer, might have had some meaning for him if he'd really gone there, but but for me, it was my own surrender to the extraordinary experiences that had peopled my life, and accept them and understand that this was part of me. It didn't have to be part of my husband, Fred. It doesn't have to be part of anybody else's. But I have to recognize and understand how it uh, affects my life and my purpose on my life, if there is such a thing, which I suspect there is.
Oh, let's not dilly dally around that one, Judith. Um,
Okay. All right.
we got we're here,
All right.
and people keep asking for centuries.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
why,
Exactly.
why am I here? And each one of us has a purpose, and many of us can't find it. And
That's right.
when you find it, it really organizes your life in a way that allows you to participate in the unfolding of reality that you're part of, in a way that if you didn't have that, life would be, and I'll use this strange, often used word, meaningful. It wouldn't be meaningful. So, this purpose is vital. And it's not that everyone has one, I think they do.
Yeah.
Small ones, big ones, depends on how you want to rate them. But you have found your purpose, and it involves meaningful coincidences or
Yeah.
outrageous synchronicities.
So if we consider, and I'm not one to hang on that word of purpose at all. Let's just put that to the side.
All
But
right.
let's say that for the moment, the notion of accepting who you are in all your weirdness, that as a businesswoman and my heading my own business with plenty of staff and plenty of responsibilities, as a mother and of kids, working in a community with lots of other moms and dads and kids and sports and everything else, you got to be normal. And I didn't, and then eventually to be vice president of the Prudential of America. I mean, and I was a woman,
Oh,
Bernie.
yeah. Early
Uh,
on in the women taking
yeah.
positions like that.
So I couldn't be weird, or I couldn't be any weirder than I already was. So there was a lot of my own inbuilt resistance to the synchronicities that I didn't understand, and I go into a lot of those in the book. The ones that you hold on to because you can't not. Like one when I was a child, I was 9, and I I just knew beyond, and somebody else could say, okay, sure, that was your expectation of something in the future. No, I wasn't thinking about my future life. I had no idea. And I saw a woman when I was 9. I saw a woman who was in her 30s when in a business suit and carrying a briefcase. And I knew that would be me. So that I'm now that's not necessarily synchronous, but it sure was that day in terms of what it meant to me. So
Just briefly, let's call it synchronous because
yeah,
this precognition thing is part of synchronicity.
I love that.
It's a broad umbrella. So
Yeah.
please continue.
Okay. So with all of these crazy things that happened that I had to put in the background. At the time, my husband at the time was also a corporate vice president, and I had a presence to maintain. And I loved the roles that I had. It was a privilege to have them. It was life enriching. Life was full and happy, but the weirdness had, and it was nothing anybody talked about. You know that, Bernie. I couldn't uh, I couldn't mention any of these things except to the odd, I choose the word carefully, person who would understand.
Yeah.
So it had to be kept in until I was pursuing out of circumstances my lifelong dream of going back to university. My corporate career was over. I was in my 50s. It was a fantastic opportunity to finish a PhD that I had started in my late 20s, but didn't finish for all kinds of good reasons. It wasn't time. I had other things to do. Now I wanted to go back to university and follow the dream of studying literature, but my own Canadian literature in both languages. So French literature and English Canadian literature. And it's so fun and it's so wonderful. Now I wasn't a kid having to earn a living. I was an adult going to take my life experience into academics. And so I got started doing what I wanted to do, which was reading about women who, and this is now we're talking about the time in the 20th century, the last years of the 20th century, where women were starting to have corporate presence. But women had always assumed roles of responsibility, but not often recognized. And they
Right.
started to write about it in the mid 20th century. So I had picked 4 women, two in French Canada and 2 in English Canada, in our culture, in our vast and diverse culture that I was going to work on. And so I dug in our academic rigor. We have exams to complete, got all that done. Then we have to research the dissertation, and then you have to present your research findings to a board who is going to be your jury. And you have to convince them that your work is good enough to keep going on your doctoral dissertation. So I'm there. I've got all this work done. My dissertation director is with me, and all is going well. And they give me the go ahead. I've been at this for 2 years now on this particular research because I had other things going on in life too. But as one of the directors was leaving the room, she looked at me and said, Judith, if you're going to proceed with this, you've missed a very important person. And you don't have to do much with this. I just want to tell you that you have to include her in your research or it won't be complete. And she told me who that was. And it happened to be a 17th century nun. I'm not Catholic. I was brought up in the Anglican, that is the Episcopalian church, long ago left it, had married a Catholic, but not practicing. I wasn't interested at all. So to learn about this nun and why she was significant to a jury member, one of the professors that mattered, I made a beeline for the library. And I spoke to the librarian and I got all the help I could to dig into what this woman had left, because this professor had said this woman was one of the most prolific writers of the 17th century. And she came to Canada when she was 40, in 1640 about, and she was the first professional person. She was a nun, but she came with a mission to set foot on this in the new world as a woman with a job to do. So I got started, and oh, Bernie, I just started reading. I read her collected letters, what's left of them. I read her autobiography, because that's what I was interested in, was autobiographical writing. I read her spiritual autobiographies, 2 of them, and I couldn't put them down. This woman, I mean, it was just all of a sudden I knew where I had to be. I can't even explain it. Why would I suddenly give up 2 whole years of research, not to mention doing all the coursework, and now I'm in my 50s. I don't have time to waste. And I've got an approval on my plan. And I knew that I had to put everything aside, everything. And before long, I found, and I don't mean frivolously, this took me into the fact that she was a mystic. I didn't know mystics any more than anybody else. I had to start all over again and go back into the origin of mysticism in the Christian tradition to begin with, way back to the 2nd century writings. I had to start all over again, Bernie. And that was huge, but I knew it was what I had to do. I don't know why. So over I go to my dissertation director and I tell her the story. I ask her if I can delve into this woman who's little known in Canadian history, especially in English Canada, but very well known in religious circles in Quebec, but not outside them necessarily, because she was much more than a nun. She was a polyglot. She was a businesswoman. She was a mother. She was the founder of an order. She was in history someone to pay attention to. And here I had this glimpse of who she was. So I changed my whole thesis direction. But there was something else going on. And that something else had to do with a huge event that had happened while I was still in business, when I was 40. And that has to do with the story of the red-haired missionary, where I found myself inexplicably in a circumstance where a dying, since you ask about the connection to death, a dying woman friend who was as close to me as any older woman has ever been. And her name was Grace. I called her Grace, though she was a neighbor. I'd grown up with her since I was 2 years old. And I was visiting her once or twice during the week, as she was now alone, a widow, and dying of an aggressive cancer. But she was wonderful. And I would drop in to see her and love my time with her, knowing that it was going to be short. One day I stopped in and she was very out of sorts. I'd never seen her like this in my life. And she told me that her minister had come by. She was Presbyterian, and he would visit often. And she had a question for him. And that was why she couldn't have the gift of tongues. I didn't know anything about the gift of tongues. Heard about it in the Bible. Sure, something to do with the Holy Spirit and a special gift of divine acknowledgement. So I had been praying, though I wasn't, as I said, I was only agnostic, but I prayed because I loved her. And I prayed every night that God or whoever it was who could help her, help me to ease her in her suffering and in her dying. So I sort of invoked that prayer then and said, okay, God, if that's who you are, give me a hand here. And I heard myself saying, Aunt Grace, you know, we all have gifts. I mean, great opera singers have gifts that they develop and work on, but they're born with it. I don't have that, but we can sing. And then there's these fabulous football players and basketball players and athletes, and she was okay with it, but it clearly didn't answer her longing, a longing that came from her heart. She was in her early 70s. I was 40. So before I left her that day, I said, Aunt Grace, I won't be able to come back on Thursday. I'll only be able to see you next Tuesday. I have to go into the hospital for just a routine, women's thing. I had 3 kids and I had to have this little minor surgery. And I said, I'll be fine and I'll see you on Tuesday. So I went into the hospital the next day, kissed my kids, my husband, said goodbye. I'll see you in a couple of days. No, see you next day. Next day, it was overnight. Have the minor operation in the morning, and I'm deliciously alone in a double room overlooking the river in Toronto. And it's just lovely, peaceful. And all of a sudden, in clangs another patient. Boy, the doctor's making all kinds of noise, and nurses and orderlies, and this poor woman out cold on a stretcher or on the bed. To make the story short, they put her to bed. She was out cold. I go to sleep, and in the middle of the night, she is awake, retching, very sick. I ring for the nurse, nobody comes. I ring again, nobody comes. I jump out, I help her up, clean her up. By the time a nurse finally comes, she's all put back together and going back to sleep. I guess an hour or so later, I don't know how much longer, she's up and at it again. I ring for the nurse doesn't come again. I tend to her best I can. In the morning, over tea and toast, this lovely young lady says, I'm so sorry I've been such a bother. I said, well, we both had the same minor surgery, but you've got babies at home, and my kids are grown up, and I'm in better shape physically right now than you are. You're just getting over childbirth. That's nothing. She said, what do you do? I had my books and papers briefcase on the bed. I said, well, I'm in the insurance business. No, she said. What did you do before that? I thought that curious. I thought it strange. Why would she want to know that? Well, I said I had a translation company. We taught language training to executives and business people, as well as handled corporate translation. I thought so, she said. How could she think so? I've never seen this woman in my life before. So she said, do you speak languages? Well, I said, I'm fluent in French and English and conversant with a few others. I said, what do you do? I'm a missionary, she said. Oh, well, I didn't really know any missionaries. And all of a sudden and quickly, she said, I have the gift of tongues. Well, right then and there, you could have knocked me right out of the bed. And she said, but I don't have the gift of interpretation. And I suspect that you do. Well, Bernie, 2 days before, I'm with my dying beloved Aunt Grace. Never in a million years would the thought or the notion of speaking in tongues have entered my life. Except that I had a wonderful Jamaican housekeeper who often went to service, where she would sometimes come home and be just lifted up by the service. And I sort of remembered maybe a mention of tongues, but nothing I could hang a hat on. I said, "Excuse me, but would you try me?" She said, "Sure." And this gibberish came out of her mouth, but I knew every word she said. It wasn't gibberish to me. It was sounds that were not normal sounds. I said, "Can you say that again?" She said, "Yes, of course I can." And I got a piece of paper and a pencil and wrote down the sounds of which she said, of the words she said. And then I translated those sounds into everyday English. And I said, "Would you excuse me, please?" And I picked up the phone and I called Aunt Grace and I told her what had happened. I said, "Aunt Grace, this message is for you. I don't pretend to understand it. I don't have any idea what this is about, other than to know this is for you." There was silence on the end of the phone. And then she said, "Thank you, dear. I'll see you on Tuesday." But there was a huge change in Aunt Grace after that. I never saw this woman again, this red-haired missionary. We were both released that morning back to our busy days, her to her children and plans to head off to Africa with her husband. I never thought about her again, except in this context, which would upend my whole life. And now I want to tie that to the mission, to the nun of the 17th century, because this began a different space of much, much more than we know, bound by love. It doesn't have to be in a religion, but it had to be in a space of my culture and my understanding as I understand it, for me to then lead and go forward to accept the side of me that was beckoning me to open up. That's a long story. It's in the book.
It's in the book, and you've opened up a lot, and you have a lot of other stories to be able to tell people. Um, what is the big picture that you see with all these stories, these coincidence stories, these synchronicity stories that you have experienced?
That's a very important question. And it's important because not everybody will have them. Carl Jung had one, and it changed his whole perspective, but it was only one in his whole life.
He had a lot more than one.
Oh, did he? I'm
Yes.
sorry, then. I thought he said it was, that's the scarab beetle. I
Yeah,
thought,
that is the most famous
okay.
synchronicity there is. But if you look at his book on synchronicity, uh,
Okay.
you'll see more of them, and you read more about him. You'll find that well before he published that book, he was talking about synchronicity in the 1920s. But like you working in corporate, he was afraid to bring it up, so he only brought it up toward the end of his life. But
I
no,
see.
there's you,
Lots
you
and
Jung
lots.
wouldn't have written about it as much without having had as many experiences.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you asked a question about the bigger picture, and there's lots now being written and opened by people who have a much better perspective than I ever could. Uh, People like you who've taken it deeply into from your own practice and then translated into coherence in books.
Thank you.
But in my experience and the compulsion to write about it is to accept that as a whole species, we all have these diverse uh, abilities, let's say, for want of a better word, or interests even. We have what are they, 4 astronauts circling the moon this week?
Yeah.
Uh, I wouldn't be one of them. I'll tell you that. I'd want my feet on the ground, but I'm delighted. I don't want my mind on the ground, but I want my feet on the ground. And I'm so delighted that they would put their whole focus and life into the future of exploration as we know it in our times. So for me, it's to share this to say it's okay for some people to have these experiences and not others. It's okay for some people to have the gift of tongues and not Aunt Grace. I never had that experience again, ever. So to hear someone else express in a language they call glossalia, that was my one and only experience. Why? The synchronicity of it had deeper meaning. And so we as amateurs can look to those people who have taken the time and put in the effort to understand and go deeper into meanings, to enrich our own lives. And you know the funny thing that happens, Bernie? It's that when we're open to this, even a little, it starts to happen to us. Not that it's just starting, but we're beginning to recognize perhaps things that were always there. Just opening up to wonder and mystery of this whole experience of life. Yeah, that's how I take it. Uh, and to pay attention when these things do happen to you. Um, in in his own way, I know my husband was very touched by that coincidence and made him think about other things that might have been coincidental in his own life in a different way. It
Yeah,
was
that'll happen, and
that'll happen.
that's the way it happens. Is just as you say, somebody wanders along, especially since he knows you are very interested in it. He's going to say, "Well, look at that one. Maybe there's something more to it," and that's what he did, and that's what books like yours and my books do for people is remind them that they're not the only ones experiencing that sort of thing, uh, this synchronicity. And the research is pretty good about frequency that they're out there. And what you are emphasizing that I think is so important is you got to pay attention. And by paying attention, it means you got to see them. You got to notice them.
Yeah,
And you have been sensitized since maybe age 9 to say there's something more going on around here, and I need to be able to pay attention to what these weird things are because they're actually a common part of human experience if you pay attention.
exactly. And it could be, for example, that I believe it's Eric Orgo who speaks as an anthropologist, that some of these synchronous events can actually play into the uh, continuation of the species and the health and well-being of the species where love and connection is required at a certain level to just keep the whole physical game going. But it can also, as my book points out, in my case, drew me not just to interesting things as we've spoken about, but to deeper and deeper uh, uh, perspectives and drawing us, if we are willing to go there, into questions of the meaning of our own lives. And I don't mean that in, whether I'm going to be the best car salesman that ever there was and drive around in a flashy red car and know it's my purpose, putting good people in good cars and having them come back year after year. That's a wonderful purpose. It's a wonderful role in life. But I mean more than that. And that is when the big questions of the pain of loss, the pain of death, the pain of unexpected uh, you can call it tragedy or suffering that we all have to some degree. And we're invited in various ways to explore those issues. And some people seek answers in religion, or whatever religion speaks to them or has been part of their tradition. Others will take solace in outrageous sports, climbing the steepest peaks and stuff like that, just because it's their way of dealing with the limits of life, one of which is death. And others will drown their sorrows or whatever in substance and who knows what. And others will be academics who from their very early years go and study psychiatry and go deep into the meanings of the brain. And great, so glad that we have all that diversity. So accepting that this is now, thank goodness, determined to be a real, repeatable, scientifically honored and respected um, part of human experience. Uh, we'll still have people who disagree. Okay, good. That's fine. We as skeptics have to be healthily skeptical about everything. But this leads to a much deeper place, and that deeper place is pretty wonderful to go to. Not forgetting that there is humor. And I'm going to, if you'll let me, go to the very end of the book, where it's kind of a bookend, where I list or I demonstrate how you can keep your own anomalog. And this doesn't mean that you're going to start having um, uh, 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 a whole journal full of experiences. You might have 3 in the course of a year or 10 years, but they're remarkable. It might be a dream. It might be somebody else's story that's just too crazy not to remember. And so you can keep an anomalog, and a log of anomalous experiences. And so I show you how to do that. So here's a funny one that kind of ties the idea of your own culture, religion, which, as Professor Jeffrey Kripal says, every single religion that was ever invented started with synchronicity. It started with coincidences and unexplainable events that were beyond our normal life experience. So if we stay with mine, for instance, it was only a few years ago that I was at a wonderful kind of retreat, but it was a lovely gathering of people who are connected to the Scientific and Medical Network, an organization of academics and friends of academics and medical people who like to talk about stuff like this and other paradigm shifting things. And we were in the south of France, and we were visiting some, just absolutely beautiful places that, among others, had been reputed to be an area that Mary Magdalene, the beloved of Jesus, one of his beloved disciples, and a special one to him, uh, is, is reputed to have visited. After Christ's death, apparently she crossed the Mediterranean and came into the northern shores of the Mediterranean and into that area in France. And so it was not unusual that there was a guest speaker that day to speak about a book that had been discovered and kept by people in that region who are known as the Cathars, Cathar, in history. And they were people who were a Christian sect that did not exactly toe the line to the satisfaction of the Pope and people of that epoch, way back, hundreds of years ago. And eventually, because they would not comply, they were eradicated.
Yeah.
Whole Cathar community was destroyed.
Yeah.
One of their sacred holdings is reported to be the gospel of the beloved companion. And that gospel was translated by an extraordinary woman called Jeanne de Quillon, who is really remarkable. And she was visiting as a special guest that day. She lives in the south of France after having left many years of living and working in the United States, or originally Irish. And she was presenting her work. To be prepared for that day, I had read this translation. And as an academic, I was respectfully skeptical. I loved the book. I loved it. It is a beautiful book. But as an academic, I need to see the source. It's a normal question. Anybody working in translation, if you're working from source texts, you show your text. But the reason that this text is forever hidden, the source text is forever hidden, is fear that it would be destroyed, because it flies in the face of traditional Christian dogma as to the relationship and the role of a woman as the primary disciple, not Peter, the founder of the Church of Rome, for example, but this extraordinary woman of compassion and love. So I am sitting in this audience of 12 people, and these thoughts are going through my head respectfully, because I have loved the book and I really, really appreciate the professionalism and the intelligence of Jeanne de Quillon, who is speaking to us. But this doubt is going through my mind. Of course, I'm an academic. All of a sudden, my cell phone buzzes. I look down and it's a text. I didn't have my phone on, but I could receive texts. And it's a text from my granddaughter. I'm in the south of France. She's in Canada. And she sends this text to me and it says, "Grandma, can you please send me your apple pie recipe right away? I'm right in the middle of making my apple pie." I go, "Oh gosh." So I text her quickly. I say, "Okay, Kate, here it is. 1, 2, 3, just do this, 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 and this, and you're good." And I said, "Where do I send the recipe?" She says, "Well, here's the address, Grandma." It was at school. I had never seen this address before. I didn't even know she had an account. She was about 14, but she had the school account. So, okay, I looked down. Do you know what it said, Bernie? Here's the address. Remember what's going through my head? CATHAR at, and the school address. Because her name was Kate with a C, and her last name started with HAR. So she combined the first 3 letters of her name and the first of her first name and the first 3 letters of her last name. And in my mind, when I am doubting this whole thing about the Cathars and the sacred text that no one could see, but I'm allowed to read, this magnificent translation from the original Aramaic, I'm told. And I get this text out of the blue from this beautiful girl. That's just me putting my hand up. so, so, so what do you make of something like that? Do we say, "Oh, there's your answer. The 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 book is solid. You don't need to see the original"? No, that's not the answer. The answer is pay attention, Judith. Pay attention. This is important. Respect what the author is telling you and take it in for yourself. In all time and in somebody's good good judgment, if this translation is to be more than what I'm experiencing today and others by reading it, you can buy it online anywhere you want. It's called The Gospel of the Beloved Companion. But I could show, Bernie, I could show the 12 other people who were there at that very moment my cell phone with the text from this girl. Now, nobody else got a message like that, but I did.
And you did as a representative, perhaps, of the people there. And the message you were sending not only to yourself, but also to the others is, hey, there's something important. There's something important going on right here. Let's focus on it. And what you learned, give up your skepticism right now, please, uh, and listen, and maybe there's something there. Well, Judith, we've come to the end of our time together, um,
Gosh.
and I thank you for your stories and your enthusiasm for these synchronicities that you are telling us, and there's many more for those of you who are interested in outrageous synchronicity. A book by Journey to the Sacred by Judith Crichton, who is our guest today. Judith, do you have any last comment you'd like to make before we stop?
Well, Bernie, I would just like to say thanks for the work that you do. From the time when I was a much younger woman and I could not speak about this for fear, not just of being laughed at or not taken seriously, but that there might have been something wrong with me. And then when I got over that part, then there was, well, why me? Am I supposed to do something with this? I mean, that whole
And
episode.
let's say you have done something with it. Let's just say that and
Okay.
leave that
All
for
right.
our audience to delve further into
All right.
what Judith Crichton has been doing with all of that in
Thanks
her book, Outrageous Synchronicity. So thank you very much for being with us today, Judith. It's been a pleasure.
for me too, Bernie. Thanks a million.
You're welcome.